Our minister, Leon Dunkley, is back from his sabbatical today. Okay, 2 more chances to clap. He's giving this morning's reflection, and one next week. Rejoice. It's a busy Sunday here today. There's a potluck lunch downstairs after the service, and at 2 there's a concert with the Rose Quartet, Beethoven, Ravel. And there are other announcements in your order of service. Are there any additional ones? Well, that's amazing. Sometimes we go on for 20 minutes. If you haven't already done so, please silence your phone. Is Tatum here? No, okay. All right, but the children are still going to go down and have a good time downstairs.
My second mom is named Betty. She lives in Berkeley, California. My mom's best friend from church in New Jersey, and so she lives on a street called Parker Street, and across the street is her daughter Dara, who was sort of my sister growing up. And Dara married Uri, who's this crazy dude. And they have 2 kids together, Finn and Arik. And then next to Dara's house is Kristen's house, where she has lived with a series of partners who sort of migrate. Like when if the relationship ends, it usually ends so amicably that there's another sort of tiny house in the back that the partner moves out into the tiny house, and then across the street. But it's a community of people who have loved each other like family for years and years and years. Dara, who is my best bud, I decided to go to seminary in her kitchen. And I talked to her first about it because I trusted her. She came out on like day 3 of my stay in California, and she said, she didn't say hi, she just kind of hugged me quickly and then ran off to the grocery store. And then I got a text later that day that says, "Do you play pickleball?" We spent maybe 3 hours together over the course of my time there, and I would say 2 hours and 57 minutes were spent talking about pickleball. You know, at the end I was like, "How are you?" She's like, "I'm fine." Hadn't seen her in 12 years. Good morning, everyone. To all souls, I bid you welcome. It is so good to see you all, and it's so good to be together again. Can we read something together, you and I, as we get things started? Could I ask you to open your gray hymnals to hymn number 77? And I just want to read the first verse together. There's no need to rise, just reading the first verse. Are you there? Okay. So with me, seek not afar for beauty, lo it glows in the dew-wet grasses all about your feet, in birds, in sunshine, in childish faces sweet, in stars and mountains and summits topped with snow. Thank you. Thank you. You may be awesome. May you be awesome. May we always be awed by life, as odd as Rachel Carson was. Do you remember Rachel Carson, the woman, Rachel Carson, or know of her work? Rachel Carson was a naturalist. She's an intriguing person. She carved a beautiful path through life. She started her career in writing radio scripts about fish. And she continued as a junior aquatic biologist in 1936, one of only 2 women in the agency. She studied commercial fisheries of the Chesapeake Bay. Her science was meticulous. Her writing is still regarded as some of the best. She earned $38 a week. Her 1962 book, Silent Spring, challenged American agriculture and caused society to rethink its relationship with the natural world. She was far ahead of her time. Rachel Carson was born in 1907. She died in 1964. This May, the 27th, will mark her 117th birthday. Her spirit is still with us. Many treat her like she's still alive somehow. This is a quote. Dear Rachel Carson, happy birthday on your 103rd anniversary of your birth. We wish you were here. There's so much to tell you about the oceans since you left this world 46 years ago. So begins a Mother Jones article that was written by a woman named Julia Whitty. This article was published in 1910, so it's 60 years ago now since we lost dear Rachel Carson. We lost Rachel Carson, but we did not lose how she chose to see the world. She encouraged us to take tender, close look at the nature that's all around us, as if we could hold it all, cradle it totally, and nurture all there is in our very hands. We've got the whole world in our hands. We've got the whole wide world in our hands. We've got the whole world in our hands. We've got the whole world in our hands. Rachel Carson saw the whole wide world as one. She knew that we were all connected and so deeply intertwined. A tear in the distant global fabric can still be felt right here at home. The world is one. We have to remember to see it that way. And how do we do that? Joni Mitchell knew. Women often know. Not always, but often. Joni Mitchell sees the whole wide world as one, and she surrenders to it. She sings these words, I'll speak them. She sings, at a highway service station over the month of June, there was a photograph of the Earth that was taken coming back from the moon. And you couldn't see a city on that mirrored bowling ball, or a forest, or a highway, or me here least of all. And you couldn't see these cold water restrooms, or this baggage overload, westbound and rolling, taking refuge in the roads. Everywhere we stand can be a miracle. Every corner of the world a shrine. And in the drab ho-hum of a roadside bathroom, Joni Mitchell saw the profound. There must have been a photograph of the Earth on some old calendar, I guess, that was hanging somewhere in a facility by the side of the road. You know the calendars that I'm talking about, the kind that you hang up with a push pin in public places for the tracking of time in months and weeks and days. I think Al Gore would have loved this calendar, particularly that picture. I know that he loved the picture that Joni Mitchell described, and I know that he valued its significance, and he said so in an interview in 2007. He said, the first picture of the Earth from space that any of us saw was taken on Christmas Eve in 1968. During the Apollo 8 mission, Al Gore during the Apollo 8 mission. And then he introduces himself. He says, "I'm Al Gore." And jokingly he says, "I used to be the next president of the United States." So it was 2006, so it wasn't long after that controversial election 7 years earlier, the hanging chads in Florida. Do you remember this? The chads that swung the election away from him 24 years ago now. Al Gore was joking around, but you could tell he was still a little bit hurting inside. Many of us were. It was a difficult time. So he joked around, and there was a little bit of applause and some nervous laughter. But Gore pushed through it and continuing, interrupting the awkward lightheartedness. Laughing at himself, he said, "I don't find this particularly funny." No one was laughing because it was funny. Al Gore put people at ease, and I admire him for that. I continue to learn this lesson from Al Gore. I continue to learn that it is ever and always possible to maintain one's grace and dignity, even in times of crisis, and especially in times of crisis. For this is the central, core value of true leadership. Grace and dignity are its definition. Al Gore fought the good fight, and he lost, and no one died when he struggled with that. It's different now. After his highly contested presidential election back in the day, a challenge followed, and Gore saw to the peaceful transition of power. He found the courage to say these great words. He said, almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feelings must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Al Gore said, "The Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt that while I strongly disagree with this court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. Tonight, for the sake of the unity of our people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession." Al Gore had the whole wide world in his hands, and he cherished it. He's a gracious man. It remains ever and always possible to maintain grace and dignity, even in times of maximal political crisis. In fact, times of maximal political crisis are the most important times to maintain grace and dignity. That's when it matters most. I like Al Gore. He often says things that touch something deep inside of me. I don't always agree with him, and his wife has terrible taste in music. But I always identify with his passion and the strength of his commitment. Not his commitment to himself, but his commitment to the United States, as it currently is and as it may one day become. As an American anthem reminds us, the one I sang as a child, "Oh, beautiful our heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self our country loved, and mercy more than life, America. May God thy goals refine, until all success be noble est, and every gain divine." Too often these days, patriotism makes a vulgar appeal. It appeals to naive outrage and interminable fear-mongering. It appeals to cancel culture strategies and insufferable behaviors. Too quickly we resort to rejection or suspension or dismissal or expulsion as punishments for believing differently in the land of the free. That's not what patriotism is. That's belligerence. True patriotism is loyalty. I don't know how interested you are in this, but there's a book by a philosopher named Josiah Royce, and I would love to explore it with you. It's called The Philosophy of Loyalty, and it was written about 100 years ago, in 1918, when dear Rachel Carson was 11 years old. For Royce, loyalty was a virtue that must be understood in neither exclusively political nor exclusively military terms, but as the foundation of every enterprise in which human beings are engaged. Science, morality, religion, government, business. Royce understood these things to be inextricable from one another. Like Rachel Carson, he understood that they were deeply interconnected and deeply intertwined. A tear in any one part is always felt in the fabric of the whole. The world is one. We have to remember how to see the world this way. For Josiah Royce, loyalty meant the willing, practical, wholehearted devotion to a cause or an ideal whose realization, however fragmentary in human history, requires the cooperative effort of many distinct individuals performing specific sets of tasks. Loyalty means willing, practical, wholehearted devotion. It's not an aspect of closed-mindedness. It's not a specious parochialism. It's the highest expression of courage, which means wholeheartedness, taken from the French word cœur, which of course means heart. I promised myself I wouldn't do this, but why are French omelets only made with one egg? Because one egg is an œuf. You missed me, right? Not that much. True loyalty is courage and deepest compassion. What does loyalty mean right now in Gaza? What does it mean in Israel? What does it mean in Sudan? In Ukraine? Right here in the Upper Valley? In Burlington? In Tunbridge? I don't believe in narrow patriotism. It hasn't been serving us well. I don't believe in naive loyalty. It doesn't ennoble us. To the memory of my father, who served as a lieutenant in the Army, who served proudly in Limestone, Maine in the 1950s, to my father, whose commitment to family was absolute and was made possible in part by his service to country, I can offer neither narrowness nor the naive. It's not worthy of him. I can let no bitterness attend his memory. Nor is bitterness worthy of my mother, who supported him for those years, who survived his passing, and who is still cute as a button in central New Jersey. My mother supported my father while he was serving in Limestone, Maine, my lovely mother who does not like the cold at all. Lived in Limestone, Maine. For years, because of her commitment to him, her commitment to family that they would create, and their commitment to country that remains wholehearted and absolute. Just like the recent eclipse, this is a kind of totality. I digress. I was talking about Rachel Carson and Joni Mitchell. I was talking about Al Gore and that picture of the whole wide world, because everything is all connected to everything else. It's all connected. Climate change and immigration, Israel and Gaza, naive patriotism and the cable news channels, talk radio, and scandalous presidencies. All of these are deeply intertwined. Although few of us really know precisely how. We're trying to understand that, but it's more challenging than we thought. It's really hard to move the needle forward. Almost 2 decades ago, Al Gore tried. He said, "I've been trying to tell this story of climate change for a long time, and I feel as if I've failed to get the message across. I was in politics for a long time, and I'm proud of my service. There are good people in politics in both parties who hold the issue of climate change at arm's length because they know that if they acknowledge it, if they recognize it, then a moral imperative to make big changes becomes inescapable." We can keep such things at arm's length only when we don't have the perspective that we need to do otherwise. Only when we fail to choose the perspective that we have to do otherwise. The photograph that we've been talking about provides all the perspective we need. The photograph itself tells a good story. As Al Gore reminds us, the astronauts of Apollo 8 had lost radio contact when they went around the dark side of the moon, and there was inevitably some suspense. But then they came back into radio contact, and they looked up and they snapped the picture that we've called Earthrise. That picture exploded the consciousness of humankind, and it led to dramatic changes. Within 18 months of this picture, the modern environmental movement had begun. I wonder what will change after so many of us witnessed the eclipse a few weeks ago. I wonder if that event will explode in the consciousness of humankind. 3.5 months ago, soon after Christmas Day, one good season in the past, one long, wet, rainy, deep, muddy season in the past, as I understand. I packed my car with clothes and instruments and I drove south toward New York City, which is the city of my birth. I drove south through central Jersey, which is where I happily misspent my childhood. I drove through Maryland and then past Washington, D.C., and then on into Virginia, changing directions west-southwest on into Tennessee. I stayed the night in Chattanooga and had one of the best meals of my journey. And during that meal, I was called Hun or Honey more times than I can count, restoring something in me that I cannot rightly name, something that I value and something that was almost entirely lost from me somehow. In the morning, I went southwest into the state of Mississippi and then into the state of Alabama and then into the state of Mississippi, past the cities of Birmingham and across state lines towards the city of Jackson. Finally, I turned southwest and drove into Louisiana. I drove long miles on a quiet highway until I crossed the bridge over Lake Pontchartrain and finally arrived in New Orleans. I did all that in 3 days. 515 miles to Washington, D.C., 610 miles to Chattanooga, 490 miles to the Crescent City, a little more than 1,600 miles in all in 3 short days. It was so intense. I haven't traveled that hard in years. I felt really good about it. I felt hardcore. I got to my place on Frenchman Street and started walking around the Marigny, which was the name of the parish that I was living in, the neighborhood I was living in. I was road weary, but the only thing I kept thinking about was Rachel Carson. I had no choice really, because of the shape of the life that I'm leading, because of the friends that I have, and because of the music that I love. Of course, I thought about Rachel Carson. Of course I did. I did so constantly. She had written so well about the environment, about the challenges that we face. 30 years before Bill McKibben started talking about global warming, 60 years before Greta Thunberg spoke about climate change, Rachel Carson was doing the work, opening up new frontiers, new spaces in the American imagination, setting the stage for what would brazenly, powerfully, and also quite naturally follow on. Carson's ideas had such integrity, thorough and fully grounded. So much has grown from them over the years. Silent Spring was the seminal text. In '62, she wrote, "There was once a town in the heart of America where life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings, a town that lay in the midst of a checkerboard of prosperous farms, with fields of grain and hillsides of orchards, where in spring white clouds of bloom drifted over the green fields." A uniquely gifted writer, she took her ideas seriously. She used her gifts so well to bless the world. She was committed to the integrity of her own mind, to her own ideas. She was committed to the whole wide world in the absolute. That's what it's going to take as we move forward. It will take our absolute commitment to the beauty of the whole wide world. She wrote factually and courageously, with discipline and with power. She wrote with insight about the very real dangers we face, and she did so non-anxiously. She did so in a way that did not exploit our sense of outrage, in a manner that didn't drive us to the brink of sanity. She did not call upon fear. She did not call upon outrage. She did not call upon indignation or petty dismissal. She was not bitter. And neither did she flinch. She would not crumble under pressure. She never lost touch with the beauty of the earth. She wrote about the power of that beauty, and she wrote about its great fragility. Along the roads, she wrote, laurel and viburnum and alder, great ferns and wildflowers delighted the traveler's eye through much of the year. Even in winter, the roadsides were places of beauty, where countless birds came to feed upon the berries and on the seeds of the heads of dried weeds rising from the snow. So had it been from the days many years ago when the first settlers raised their houses, sank their wells, and built their barns. And then a strange blight crept over the area, and everything began to change. Some evil spell had settled on the community, and there was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? The birds were gone. As I walked the streets of New Orleans, my eyes were trained hard to the ground. Now, there's a commonly held belief that wisdom comes to us from on high, but maybe that's true in other places, but the opposite is true in New Orleans. Wisdom flows up from the earth, from the city streets, from the sidewalks. Every inch of that city has an epic story to tell. The same is true in a different way right here in the Upper Valley. What I saw in New Orleans was not unique to New Orleans. It was just that I better learned how to see it there. Seek not afar for beauty, lo it glows in dew-wet grasses all about your feet. I kept my eyes down, not up, but down, and went looking for heaven, in a city where all hell can fall like flood rains from the sky. I kept my eyes down to look for heaven, down to seek for beauty, down to know the wisdom of the street, and there I saw it plainly, the poverty and the pageantry that were walking side by side. The many proverbs that were painted on or carved into the sidewalk that read, I believe in myself, or I see the beauty in you. At sunrise, these messages are plainly visible beneath the syringes that were used the night before. New Orleans can be a dangerous town, but this is true everywhere these days. I kept my eyes down and looked for heaven. I looked for wisdom and I looked for grace, which is why I thought of Rachel Carson. Now, there are regular street signs in New Orleans, bless you. There are regular street signs in New Orleans, but there are also street lines that are tiled into the walkway. So you can read them when your eyes are cast down. St. Claude and Mandeville, Franklin and Burgundy, Elysian Fields and Decatur, Bourbon Street and St. Anne, Frenchman and Delphine. This is why I thought of Rachel Carson. They meet at right angles at intersections, all of these names. Now, with one spectacular exception, I knew absolutely no one in New Orleans when I went down there. And the one person that I did know was out of town when I arrived. I sang a song that she wrote each and every day until I saw her. The song that she wrote called Dear Rachel Carson. The words were these. Dear Rachel Carson, you were right all along, and now our hearts are heavy and weary, but with all due respect, I've got something to add to your theory. You know how you said that we knew we were lost when there were finally no birds left to sing? If we lose New Orleans, we'll lose everything. She sang. When I came here, it was like being pulled by a string. Every street had a name that I wanted to sing. Tchoupitoulas, Burgundy, Dauphine. The saints and the bastards of Louis XIV. If we lose New Orleans, we'll lose everything. Tchoupitoulas, Burgundy, and Dauphine. These are the street names tiled into the walkways of the city of New Orleans. The names that tell stories of brokenness and beauty, sacredness and sassiness, decency and dignity, peace and power and passion and poverty and pageantry. All of these are walking side by side. Now, I'm sure there will be a time to talk about the eclipse in the future, where we were, what we saw, whether we choose to see it at all. But the totality that touches me is the deep love that I share with you in this house in Woodstock, Vermont. The love that plumbs the depth of our commitment to live life in fullest measure. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.